Previously on Media Brothers.
Thanks for guys for watching. And what the is that? Oh, wait, no.
Gabe has a big ass forehead.
What? Oh, I'm fine. Hey there, stranger. Welcome to the universe where Illumination never made their Mario movie, so our definitive Mario movie is the 1993 one. I got a Glock in my... It's weird to think that video game movies are so respected nowadays. Think about it. We went from a medium that wouldn't trust these movies with their teenage daughters to movies that often get respected for being, well made. Video game movies aren't perfect. No, rather, they've gotten better. If we saw where we started, yeah, better isn't much, but it is still good to know that video game movies are getting more and more respect. To the point where we not only have a movie inspired by Gran Turismo being directed by such a high-praised director, but we also have the Five Nights at Freddy's movie that got hyped because, well, we saw that video game movies were starting to get more effort put into them. Today I want to take a look at the last 30 years of video game movies, going as far as 1993 up to the recent year. This won't include any overseas release. I'm sure the Ace Attorney movie is good, but it only came out in Japan and I can't read, so subtitles are useless.
What about a dub?
Oh, I can't hear. I'm legally deaf.
Then how did you hear me?
Also, I'll be giving each movie a rating on my Xander's official scale, ranking on 1 to 5. These are my own opinion anyway, here we go. We start things off in 1993 with Super Mario Bros., the first ever official video game movie. Production was shit, the film didn't feel like Mario, this is supposed to be Yoshi, this is supposed to be Bowser, you better believe this is a Goomba. Mario and Luigi aren't Italian, they're New Yorkers, which was only a thing in the cartoon, and to top it all off, nobody on the production knew that this was supposed to be a video game-based movie. Not even the main freaking actors. So yeah, Super Mario Bros. 1993 was, to say the least, a mess. The film was just wrong. All things wrong. It's almost as if the producers looked at the original cover art for the first game and said, "Nuh-uh." This leads to a mismanaged and clearly uninspired movie. That doesn't feel like the epic Mario movie I'm sure people back in 1993 thought it would be. I really hate this one. It certainly was a low point for Mario. What was the biggest game that came out that year? Okay, he was fine. But this movie didn't help anything. God, it didn't feel anything close to Mario. Overall, Super Mario Bros. Is a painfully weird and bizarre experience that just falters. 1 out of 5. A year later, Street Fighter released, and give them this at least somewhat resembles Street Fighter. It looks like Street Fighter, and Bison is over the top ridiculous, and come on, nobody's fooling anybody with this poster. The film is still bad, far from a great movie, but it is harmless. Unlike Mario, I don't think this taints anything related to Street Fighter. Street Fighter V does. Oh! Jean-Claude Van Damme sucks, but what else new? It is over the top and in no way a good movie, but it's better than Mario. Again, Mario had... So in a way, this isn't saying much, but I liked it slightly more than Mario. 1.5 out of 5. The best video game movie from the 90s. That's not saying much. Mortal Kombat 1995 is a fine experience. This is about the time CG was starting to take over the industry, and you can tell. This is, like Street Fighter, completely harmless. Mortal Kombat is the game where harmless should be the last thing on our mind. The effects are hokey, but they work, the story is passable, and the characters feel like Mortal Kombat. PG-13 Mortal Kombat, but give them a break, they just started the ESRB. This is the best of the 90s video game movies, but that's not really saying much. 2.5 out of 5. I can't say nothing about Annihilation, this one sucks. It's clearly trying to do too much and ultimately does nothing. A big problem I have with the first movie is the effects, but I normally just ignore it because that was a big year of CGI development. Toy Story had just come out. But there's just nothing I can say in regards to Annihilation, a movie released after all these CG-heavy movies. I've mentioned it in a video before, so I'll end this segment here, but just note, Mortal Kombat Annihilation was a tough and soulless sequel. 0.5 out of 5. Now to the final video game film of the 90s based on the insanely popular catch-em-all RPG, Pokemon swept the world like nothing else. It was a staple of video game evolution. And if there was anything more popular in the game, it had to be the show. This show pretty much gave life to the Pokemon brand, and gave a face many associate with the name, both Ash Ketchum and Pikachu. So technically this is cheating a bit because, well yes, it's based on Pokemon, it's based more on the show. Hell, Ash is the star. But with that, this is definitely the best animated video game movie of the 90s. Whoops. I want to stress that Pokemon the first movie is not a bad film. It's got some good stuff going for it, but oh boy does it have some bad stuff too. The big thing I can say is that this movie's biggest selling point is the fact that it plays with the coolest thing about the series, Mewtwo. but the story is kind of all over the place. It's not a terribly interesting overall film. It feels more like they were trying to extend an episode of the show. There's a reason episodes of the show are as short as they are. They work in their length, but this movie runs for an astounding hour and 36 minutes. And, oh, it doesn't work. To the filmmaker's credit, this could have been worse. It could have taken too long, or it could have taken itself too seriously. But we got a way better Pokemon film nearly 2 decades later, and I guess I should mention this is the only animated Pokemon movie I'm talking about. There's like 20 of them, no way! 2.5 out of 5. Tomb Raider was quite popular in the PS1, PS2 days. I've still not played any of them, but they're decent enough games from what I've seen. I've seen a lot of the newer ones, which are pretty well received. But let's face it, there's only one reason people play these games. Boobies! Lara Croft is a hot, pixelated piece of ass, and gamers made sure this was known, even to the point of a rumored cheat code in the game that would make Lara Croft naked. You want to see pixelated titties? I don't even get to see real titties, but I'm not going to stoop that low. So in arguably a time of Tomb Raider's peak popularity, 2001, a movie came out. It's not a great movie or even good, it's just decent, and considering the 90s, I think that's saying something. Very simple story, and for the most part, it works. But it's still over the top with some of its action, and I just don't think this was Jolie's role. Overall, it's a fine movie if you want to see Tomb Raider on the big screen. This does it alright. But there is a movie we got later that I felt did Tomb Raider justice. 2.5 out of 5. Resident Evil got a bajillion movies, so let's discuss the first one that released in 2002. It's fine. Again, like most of the early 2000s video game movies, there's nothing immediately special about Resident Evil, but it works okay. The original horror game from the late 90s defined the genre. The movie can be loud and obnoxious, but it succeeds in what I think is the most important thing about a Resident Evil adaptation, the horror elements. At times it can get cheesy, but I have a soft spot for it. 2.5 out of 5. Where the first Lara Croft Titty Raider film was okay, The Cradle of Life is everything I thought the first film would be. Some call it better than the first, but this is just clearly a downgrade. It's so boring, but Jolie is still great as Lara, and the sets do look nice, with a very impressive stunt being done atop of a Hong Kong high-rise. But the issues the first film had are almost excelled in this one. It's a better film to laugh at than take as a Lara Croft movie, and that's just unfortunate. 2 out of 5. Oh, another Resident Evil movie? Why? The first film was fine, but there's not really a reason for a sequel. Well, at least this is the last one, right? I need a steel gold! Apocalypse is actually better than it needs to be. It's got a lot of good action, but it does lack in plot and character. It's not terribly creative, but I respect its dedication to the game, even if it lacks in an overall plot. I'm not taking too long on these Resident Evil movies, so let's move on. 2.5 out of 5. Hey, you know the game Doom where the guy goes to hell and fights demons? Aliens. They didn't play the game. I mean, I haven't either, but I get the basic idea. Hell, just look at the poster art! You would have understood what this game is. The acting is bad, the visuals are worse, and it's just not interesting. I'd rather play Doom 3 than watch this garbage. Rosamund Pike gives probably one of the most baffling performances in any of these video game movies. There's other bad performances, but she takes the cake. Not a good film at all. 1 out of 5. Oh my god, a third one? Alright, Extinction. Definitely a step up from the first two, but considering I only find the first two okay, that's not saying much. That being said, the plot's the best it's ever been. It actually feels like a Resident Evil film, but while it starts out pretty strong, it does drag in the last half. So yeah, it's the best of the first 3 films, but that's not saying too much. I'd say it's definitely the first one worth a watch. 3 out of 5. The problem with Hitman is, while the cast is good and the action is nice and suspenseful, the plot is very formulaic and the characters are very stereotypical of action films. For what it is, Hitman gets the job done, but it's better to just play Hitman 3 on the Nintendo Switch. 2.5 out of 5. Okay, a Far Cry movie. That could work. Far Cry is practically a movie in itself, and they always have kick-ass villains. Who's in the big man chair? Shit! Far Cry is just such a bad film, both as a video game movie and a movie in general. Yui Boll is known as one of the worst directors of all time, and this film shows all of his flaws. It feels like a 1980s B-list action movie that definitely doesn't feel like it was released in 2008, let alone being a video game adaptation. Definitely one of the worst we've seen so far. 0.5 out of 5. Mark Wahlberg as Max Payne. I'm out. This one does get the vibe of Max Payne down pretty well, but the acting is pretty tough, the action scenes weren't exactly prominent, and it was just clumsy. The whole film is just clumsy. It becomes such a disjointed flick so quick, and it's just not fun to watch, especially as a fan of the game. 1.5 out of 5. While flawed, I actually enjoyed Sands of Time. It's a good mix of Indiana Jones with Tomb Raider, which is arguably what Prince of Persia already is, but moving on. There's a bunch of chase scenes, I swear, like 40% of the movie. Jake Gyllenhaal is great as the main character. Hey, Swifties, get the f*** out! I don't care how good the concert film is, I'm not watching it. I enjoy this one wholeheartedly. It's flawed, but which of these aren't? Definitely a decent, flawed flick. 3 out of 5. Lord! 4? Movie 4? Honestly, this is another okay addition to the already okay series of movies. It's very standard, nothing really stands out. It's not as good as Extinction, but it's definitely okay. But this is Resident Evil number 4, so I'm gonna just move on. 2 out of 5. Well, at least we can get on to another. Christ! Seriously? 5 movies? That being said, I have a soft spot for Retribution. It's a lot of stupid fun that might not have been an amazing movie, but it is a fun movie. 3.5 out of 5. Need for Speed, based on the racing game, is okay. It's got a lot of good stunts and a pretty good counterbalance to the ridiculousness of the Fast and Furious movies. I like Aaron Paul, so it's nice to see him in this. It's a bit stupid, but to me, so are the games, so what else is new? You race around and it's really cool. So is me kicking your dad in the balls, but I'm not doing that either. I like this one. Kind of a guilty pleasure for me. 3 out of 5. I have no sympathy for this movie. This is awful. Like, really awful. This is the shit I think of when I think, why don't people like video game movies? And then they show me Warcraft, and I'm just like, oh, that's why. Warcraft is absolutely insane in how broken the story is, how forgettable most of the characters are, and just this overall lack of creating a true World of Warcraft environment. This film really canned any chances of World of Warcraft becoming a movie franchise. It sucks because the lore of the game could have made up for a really good movie. But clearly, they had the wrong people behind it. 1 out of 5. Did anyone want this? Especially considering this one came out during a time where the series wasn't at its prime. Did anyone actually want an Assassin's Creed movie? Granted, the games offer a lot in terms of how a movie could work. I'd argue the best game that showcases this is the first one alongside Black Flag. Clearly, they didn't take any inspiration from any of these games, because this is something else. What sucks is that this isn't an awful film, but it is a bad film in terms of its own merits and making Assassin's Creed arguably one of the most popular modern game franchises into film form. I also mostly blame this film's disjointed pacing on the director, Justin Kurzel. This Australian filmmaker clearly wasn't the right guy for the job. Not to say his other movies are bad, but clearly this could have gone to someone else. With that, is it an overly awful film? No, there's some good stuff in there. But Assassin's Creed is just not the video game film you'd want for the series. 1.5 out of 5. This is gonna come as a huge shock. I don't hate this movie. I know other critics on YouTube love to bitch about this movie, how it was rushed and how it barely feels like Angry Birds and how blah blah blah. It's a fun movie. I genuinely like this film. It's just so fun. Sure, it's not much like the games until the latter half, but a lot of the charm is that it doesn't take directly from the game. What's the epic gameplay of Angry Birds again? Riveting. So they do have to take more liberties, and I do think that's enough. It's funny enough, occasionally reminding me that this was the studio behind it. But for being an Angry Birds movie, a film that arguably shouldn't have happened, I think it does the job well enough. 3.5 out of 5. Promise it's the final one, right? Let me look. Why do we even bother calling anything the final chapter? That's like calling Final Fantasy Final Fantasy. This one sucks. I don't even think I've actually disliked any of the Resident Evil movies. I've had my issues with them, but I've usually found each one passable at best. The final chapter is really bad, both as a Resident Evil movie and as a movie. The final chapter is a damn lie, as we have one more to talk about that I've actually seen. What, one came out this year? Screw you, I'm not doing that. Raccoon City will be the last one. As for the film, it's got the basic problems a bad movie would have. It's lousy on its plot, the horror isn't really there, and it's just, I'm over the Resident Evil stuff. I don't even play the games, let alone watch the 20 films. Oh god! 0.5 out of 5. Okay, so I gotta make my video title make sense. What actually happened with video game movies? Because nowadays, they are respected somewhat. I think the first film to truly play with that was the Tomb Raider film from 2018. This is not a perfect film, but it was a step in the right direction. It's definitely a far from perfect enjoyable action film. I can't say it's absolutely the definitive Tomb Raider movie, but for being a mostly unknown Tomb Raider film, it works to an extent. Plus, the actress for Lara Croft isn't Angelina Jolie, so happy day! 3 out of 5. I remember when Detective Pikachu first got trailers, I thought it was gonna suck. I thought, this is how they ruin Pokemon. Ryan Reynolds is cool and all, but he does not fit Pikachu's voice at all. So I went to see it about a week after it came out, and yeah, it was pretty good. Not an insanely amazing film, but it's pretty good. This is why Tomb Raider was a good step for video game movies, because the year after, we got a pretty decent flick. I like the settings of this movie. Ryan Reynolds is fine as Pikachu, not to mention a twist towards the end really making it worth it. And this is a film I didn't hate Justice Smith in. Hooray! As a Pokemon film, this one surprised me. I recommend it. 4 out of 5. Where I'm mostly alone on my thoughts on the first Angry Birds, I hear most people agree Angry Birds Movie 2 is a good film. It is a surprisingly really fun movie, and I always say to myself, this is how they should do it. If they're going to do a video game movie, especially an animated one, this isn't the golden standard, but this is the bare minimum standard. It's insanely funny, even funnier than the last film, mostly because I'm not reminded of It's just a really fun film, a really fun sequel to a film I already enjoyed. Is it perfect? No, the story gets rushed at times, and I just don't like Rachel Bloom in this. And I usually do like her, but in a bizarre twist, Awkwafina's character is actually really funny. Having some of the funniest lines in the movie. It's almost like if she's given something funny to say, she'll be funny. 4 out of 5. You know, considering... Yeah, so let's discuss the process of this movie being made. Initially, this was a late 2019, early 2020 release, and it still was. But it was pushed back due to the universal hate for the design of Sonic. So Paramount had the VFX guys redesign Sonic from scratch, meaning they had to reanimate him and all the scenes he was in, which, spoiler alert, there's a lot of those, and such the film released in February of 2020. And with all this said and done, the film's okay. Jim Carrey solos as Eggman, Sonic is pretty funny, despite being voiced by Ben. I was in Parks and Rec, so I'm better than Jesus Bacon Schwartz, but it is kind of boring at times, and the story's all over the place. That being said, I enjoyed it, not enough to call it a masterpiece, but considering it's better than it has any right to be. 3 out of 5. I know nothing about the Monster Hunter games. I've never played them, so I have to judge this film as a film rather than a video game film. And yeah, it still sucks. It's just boring. Nothing really interesting or new happens. But it's not awful. It's just a standard bad movie. And considering how bad these video game movies can get, well, let's just say standard bad movie is as good as this gets. 2 out of 5. Okay, so it's been nearly 3 decades since Annihilation annihilated anything but the box office. So how does Immortal Fighting work in 2021? Simple, it doesn't. This is by far and beyond the most standard film on this list. It does its job to the bare minimum. You know, it's weird because I still consider the 1995 Mortal Kombat movie to be the superior Mortal Kombat film. Because that one was interesting, at least in parts. The effects suck, but for 1995, Toy Story wasn't even out. This film is so boring at times. I legit watched this on HBO Max when it came out. Also, when HBO Max was called HBO Max and not the first half of Max and Rubatha. And I genuinely had to pause it at times just so I could do something to keep me awake. Stretch my legs or something. It's so boring. And considering it's, you know, one of the most not boring video game franchises of all time, that's a bad sign. 2 out of 5. I'm done. I'm not doing it. I ain't doing it. In my 2022 ranking, Uncharted landed somewhere in the middle. And that's what it does now. Uncharted is a very much in-the-middle movie. It has very little in terms of being an Uncharted film, and for everyone's information, I have played the first Uncharted. I got bored. Uncharted is fine as an adventure film, but I do realize that being an Uncharted movie, it needed to stand out more. Especially with Tom Holland, who isn't awful as Nathan Drake, but you know who would have killed it? Nathan Fillion. They both have Nathan in their names, and one of them was in Guardians of the Galaxy 3! Seriously, what could Nathan Fillion have been doing at the time for him not to accept this role? I get it was supposed to be a younger Nathan Drake, but dear lord, there's a whole fan film on YouTube describing how good this could have been. It misses so much potential, but it is harmless fun, so it gets points for that. 2.5 out of 5. Sonic 2 surprises me in how superior it is to the actual first film. Also, in my 2022 video, I absolutely adored this, and it ranked 20 out of 51 films. It's still not a perfect film, but none of these will be a 5 out of 5, so let's just get to the big stuff. How does Sonic 2 hold up? It's funnier than the first film, the action is better from the first film, Knuckles! Sonic 2 could have just done the bare minimum like the predecessor did, but it delivered so much more, and I highly recommend it. Tails is a tad annoying, but give him credit, he could have been Sonic Heroes Tails where...
Sonic, check this out!
Sonic, you gotta see this, fuck, get the 4 out of 5. Well, what I initially wanted to end this video on, considering it would have been a perfect end cap to the original Mario movie, but I have seen Five Nights at Freddy's, so let's just talk about this one. I really like this movie. My thoughts have changed since my initial watching, but I really do like this film. It's like if they took the good stuff from the Angry Birds movies and mixed a little bit of the bad stuff. Fred Armisen as Cranky Kong gotta be a hate crime. Chris Pratt as Mario is fine, but a lot of the other casting works way better. Specifically Keegan-Michael Key as Toad, which shouldn't have worked the way it did. And do I need to explain how good Jack Black is as Bowser? His song is eligible for an Oscar nomination, he better win. As is, it's not perfect, but it is fun, and a huge improvement over the one from 30 years ago. Ending off our list of video game adaptations, we have Five Nights at Freddy's, one of the highest grossing horror movies of all time, all for a movie critics thought was god-awful. But if 2023 has taught me anything, it's that paid critics about to be biased as hell. I like this one. I grew up with Markiplier's Let's Plays, and I've always had a soft spot in my heart for FNAF, even if that spot has decreased by 20% after Security Breach came out. I get why critics didn't like this movie, but it is a fun little flick, and from Blumhouse nonetheless. I like the few scares there are, but this is more of a thriller than a horror. Josh Hutcherson is good in this, and I don't even want to get started on my beloved Matthew Lillard. It's not a perfect film, but as we've seen, even being an okay film is a good thing. 3.5 out of 5. It is weird to think about where video game movies came from and where they're ending up. Five Nights at Freddy's isn't the end. There's plenty of video games I'm sure we'd like to see be made into film form. Hey, that's not such a bad idea. What about a video discussing video games we'd like to see into a film? Comment down below what you would like to see. Well, until next time, No. Is that freaking Crisp, that boy?